There's only 24 hours in a day. I got a pair of earbuds and I wish there was a way that I could know just what I want to listen to. There's 150,000 shows that I'm not sitting through. When the world is dark and boring, let us do your exploring. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Welcome to Pod on Pod, a guide to the world of podcasts because it's not your daddy's radio. We're your hosts.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Joel. And this is a very special episode of Pod on Pod.
A very special show.
It's Christmas Eve, in case you haven't noticed, unless you're listening to this at a later date after we released it, in which case it's not Christmas Eve anymore, and this episode is going to have a lot less meaningful impact on you, I think.
So it's our holiday show.
That's right. It is our holiday episode, and we wanted to do something a little special for the holidays this year. So what we've done is we've gathered some of our podcasting buddies, our friends at the following shows: I Hate Critics, The Weekly Planet Podcast, Ivy Envy, Stuff You Should Know, and Mommy's Cocktail Hour. All of those shows, well, most of those shows we've actually reviewed here on Pod on Pod. I Hate Critics we haven't gotten to yet, but they were so nice to invite us to be on their Thanksgiving episode.
Yeah, and we completely jacked their idea.
Yeah, absolutely. We straight up stole it. So thank you for that, Bob, and the folks at I Hate Critics. You can hear all of those shows with links in our show notes. So if you either go in your podcast app to look at the show notes for this episode, or if you go to our website, podonpod.com, and look at the info below this actual episode, you can find links for all of those shows, and they're all really good shows. We'd suggest checking out each and every one of them. But what we're going to get to in this episode is one question from each of these podcasters. We're going to talk about what podcast would you give someone this Christmas?
That's right.
I thought it was a pretty cool idea. So we're going to let them talk first, and then we'll be back in a little bit to tell you what shows we'd like to give somebody this Christmas.
Hello, listeners of Pod on Pod. This is James and Mason from the Weekly Planet podcast.
Open strong, that's what I say.
I think it should keep in check with our regular podcast.
Okay, good, yep.
We're nothing if not consistent.
Fantastic.
We've got some podcasts to recommend, don't we, Mason, for the Christmas season?
Yes. Wait, do they have to be Christmas themed?
Yeah. No.
Oh, God, thank God.
Is yours by coincidence a Christmas podcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called Deck the Halls. And it's about...
Tim Allen Christmas movies.
Yes, Tim Allen Christmas movies and decorations. Just how to decorate your house. It's all audio, though, so it's not... It's like, okay, get a bauble that looks like this. You got one? Good. Now put it here. Doesn't that look great? It doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
There's no way to know.
Do you want me to start or do you want to start?
Tell me,
well, look.
what's a podcast you'd recommend?
One that I've been listening to a lot lately is actually... you like this one as well.
I think I'll probably listen to it.
Yeah, James Bonding.
Yes.
Which is basically two dudes, Matt Myra and Matt Gawley, both from Nerdist. And they basically break down all the Bond movies, each movie at a time. They'll get in a special guest, and they've had people like...
Paul F. Tompkins.
They've had people like... Paul F. Tompkins.
They've had Kumail Nanjiani.
Yep,
from
who's
the
great.
Indoor Kids.
Yep. And they go through all the eras and whatever. So you can start at any point, whatever kind of Bond you're interested in, and is any kind of jumping off point. It's especially good if you... It's good if you love James Bond, and it's good if you hate James Bond.
Right.
Because it's clearly two guys who love the character of James Bond and the book, and they know a lot about the lore, but they don't shy away from how much of James Bond is crap.
Crap or racist or sexist or... Like, it's a proper exploration. It's not...
Yeah.
Like, they can look back and go, this era was weird and, you know, clearly at this point the Bond movies were just aping a popular trend.
Which they often are.
They always are. They
Yeah.
pretty much always are. But it's very funny.
Yeah.
They'll have people who are big fans of James Bond or not huge non-fans.
Yeah.
But I think even if you like, I kind of like James Bond.
Yeah,
films,
that's where I'm
you know,
at. Yeah.
Just get in there and they have some. They talk some fun stuff.
Yep.
You'll realize you'll learn a lot about James Bond films and each other.
Yes.
I'm assuming you're listening to it with old friends.
Yes.
Or mortal enemies. I don't know. It's very late when we're doing this.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Matt
got one?
Gawley is also in, and I do have one, but just as a side note, Matt Gawley is also in the podcast Super Ego, which is an improvised sketch comedy show.
Okay.
So they have a premise and a premise for a scene, and they improvise a whole bunch of jokes, and they edit around and they build a really funny scene about it.
Great.
It's super great. It's released maybe once a month. They do
Okay.
it. They do it in seasons, but that's really great. Paul F. Tompkins is also a member of that team.
I do like Paul F. Tompkins.
He is great. But the show I'm going to recommend is actually an Australian podcast. It's called You Beauty.
Yeah?
And it's my friends Sam Gray and Tommy Dassler.
You can't recommend your friend.
I'm going to.
You're a bloody...
How do you like that? I'll recommend whatever I want.
Yeah.
It's Christmas. I do what I want. It's my one Christmas wish. It's you to get off my back. That's what I want. Anyway, if you're finished interrupting at Christmas, it's Christmas. Why do you interrupt at Christmas?
I'm sorry, all right?
It's fine.
Jesus.
Anyway, it's called You Beauty, and it's a podcast about sport. And you might think, well, I don't like sport. Why would I listen to this?
I do think you don't like
I
sports.
definitely don't like sport, but I enjoy listening to this. It's sort of every week they might talk about a different. They might talk about a different sport. They might talk about basketball, or the recently they had the World Cup,
Or like an event, kind of, whatever.
some kind of event that's happening.
Do they focus on also specific sports stars, maybe?
They could talk about it. They'll talk, and it's again, if you don't like sport, as I don't, you'll still enjoy it because there's a lot of really fun anecdotes. They'll talk about characters of the game,
And isn't because one of them is super into sport, and the other
one is a
not.
stand-up comedian who's not really into sport, but who's willing to learn.
Yeah.
And there's funny anecdotes and crazy characters, and it's a show that does kind of make me fired up to see a bit of sport.
Yes.
And I think if you like sport, it's very it's in depth and it's knowledgeable, and you'll be like, right
You'll
on.
sport.
Oh, you'll definitely sport all over the place. But if not, you'll still get a lot out of it because it's very funny. I recommend that.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Well, that's us doing that thing,
Yes.
isn't it?
Isn't it though?
Good luck, Pod on Pod, and good luck, Christmas.
Here's to at least one more.
Yeah, that's
This year's.
enough.
Then that's enough. No more
we get
Christmas.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Oh, find us at
Yeah, weekly,
Something Weekly
the Weekly
Planet.
Planet.
We're the Weekly
We're
Planet
around
on iTunes.
You can,
Yep.
we're there.
Great. If we're good at one thing, it's self-promotion. Okay, bye. Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Hey, Pod on Pod listeners, we're Mommy's Cocktail Hour, and my name is Tawny, mommy to Princess 7 and Bruiser 6.
This is Chrissy. I have 3 girls. Junior is 12, Mimi is 8, and Peanut is 6.
And I'm Beth, mom to Squishy, who's 4.
And we are a weekly podcast that discusses the trials and triumphs of parenting, and we wouldn't be able to do it without cocktails, of course. Josh and Joel reviewed our podcast this fall, and they gave us a very generous review for being a bunch of drunk moms. So we want to say, hey, thanks for that.
Cheers to them.
All right. So our question of the day is, if you were going to give someone a podcast this holiday season, what show would it be, and who are you giving it to? So Beth, I'll let you go first.
Oh, I get to go first. Well, I do listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of categories of podcasts, but one that I would give to a certain type of person. I wish I could gift this podcast to myself as like a younger adolescent weird person, but instead, this is the perfect podcast that I would like to give to you Pod on Pod listeners if you are a fan of the somewhat bizarre and just wired in a very strange, creative way. Like I said before, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and every now and then I just need something to have on while I'm working on something, and that can be hard to do with a lot of the ones that I normally consume, but it's not that hard to have Welcome to Nightvale on when I'm trying to kind of reapproach an idea or just creatively work on something. It's just the most bizarre background podcast you can have up and running when you're either cleaning, putting away laundry, or on the computer working on things creatively. So the Welcome to Nightvale podcast, if you're not familiar with it, is just a very bizarre approach to news in a fictional community, and it's got a lot of just bizarre. There's no way to explain it other than to the best way to decide if it's for you is just sample it, try it on. If you get creeped out, which apparently Tawny is about this podcast, then it's not for you.
Every time I've listened to this podcast, it's been at night, either on a road trip when we're driving or like right before bed. So I definitely wouldn't
very
recommend
creepy
it
then.
right before bed.
Yeah, don't if you're like house sitting in a weird house or traveling by yourself backpacking through somewhere, maybe don't listen to Welcome to Night Vale. But it's just the most. It's very well done, first of all, and it's put together. And even though they're saying the most bizarre things ever imaginable, and then every now and then you get the wait, what did they just say? It sounds so pleasing. You can look at something and it can be aesthetically pleasing to look at, but for some reason the way that they form their sentences, it is so poetic. That podcast, it's ridiculous. I don't know how they do it, but they do it, and it's wonderful. So if you're usually drawn to things that are a little bit weird, throw on Welcome to Night Vale. I recommend it for weirdos.
All right, so Chrissy, what about you?
Well, I don't have a specific podcast to give someone for a gift because, as our listeners know, I'm a busy mom and I don't really have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. I do some podcasts, but you might be surprised to know that I've listened to maybe 4 entire podcast episodes in my life. So my New Year's resolution is to listen to more podcasts. So I think for Christmas, I would give myself the gift of a podcast and the gift of some time alone to listen to a podcast. So I'll have to maybe listen to some of the Pod on Pod episodes to help me pick out some podcasts to try.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Beth, yours sounds really promising. I'll have to check that out.
I think you should check it out. But actually, Pod on Pod would be a good way, and this episode might be a good way for you to find out one that might be right for you. If
Yeah, that's
everything
true.
have a bunch
There'll
of
be a
people
lot of
recommending their
suggestions.
favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have like a long commute and I can't really listen at work. So yeah, I feel like I don't have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. But I do watch TV, so I'm sure I could maybe give up a little TV and try some podcasts out.
I know that you really like that, your serenity of after you do a meal or whatever when you're in the kitchen cleaning up. Throw on Welcome to Night Vale then.
Okay, I'll have to try it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you know what I think.
Okay, so my podcast that I would give to pretty much every person who grew up or lived in the 1980s. The podcast is called The Awesome 80s Podcast, and it is hosted by Michael and his co-host with 2 names, Lawrence and Glenn. And they talk about a different 80s movie every episode. And so you'll want to think like Spaceballs, 16 Candles, Supergirl, Twins, Caddyshack. And if you grew up in the 80s, it's a trip down memory lane for sure. And they bring up so many things that you've probably forgotten about. So it's really cool. And they've been friends for a really long time. So they have a really great chemistry with one another on the microphone. So I think that if you definitely grew up in this time period, you would love this podcast. So definitely check it out. All right, so thanks so much to the Pod on Pod team for including us in their special Christmas episode, and we wish you and your listeners a wonderful holiday season.
Cheers!
Hello, my name is Bob Zerl. With me is professional film critic Sean Petrick, and from the FilmFanPerspective.com, Josh Adams, and we are the I Hate Critics Movie Review Podcast. Each week we get together and review the latest movies that hit the theater along with random classics. We always look at what came out 30 years ago this week. And if you'd like to check out our podcast, it's ihatecritics.net. We will first want to thank Team Procreate and the guys at Pod on Pod for having us as part of their Christmas episode. What podcasts are you guys, if you could share any podcast with anybody or give it to them as a gift, what would it be?
Well, for me, it's hard to admit this because it's being 38 years old and being a wrestling fan is not exactly popular. But the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast is one I've listened to now multiple times, and I can't get enough of it. It's he goes so in depth and behind the scenes on wrestling and admitting every trick and detail of it. It's kind of, which is a lot of fun. And the history of professional wrestling is so much fun for me. It's the one thing in the world where I get to feel like a 12-year-old boy again when I watch professional wrestling or talk about professional wrestling. And so listening to him talk to Vince McMahon or Chris Jericho or any of these other guys who he's wrestled over the years or wrestled with, or just have interesting stories about professional wrestling, is just really fascinating to me. And again, it makes me feel like a 12-year-old boy again.
No, I had stopped watching wrestling for a long time, and it was podcasting that I haven't really gone back to watching it, but I've been listening to a lot of wrestling podcasts because it's neat to hear the behind-the-scenes stories that you don't really hear about, and what's real and what's fake, and sometimes they kind of intermingle, and it's an entertaining podcast.
Yeah, and Stone Cold's a really funny guy, too, when he wants to be.
And I'd say he's the best of the other guys. Jericho does one, JR, Goldberg, but Austin has the best, and he recently made headlines by interviewing Vince McMahon on there.
Yeah, and they did that
network
on the WWE network and for his podcast. And I am quite ashamed to say I have the WWE network. I've spent an inordinate amount of time watching old wrestling videos because of that. And then, of course, the Stone Cold podcast was with Vince McMahon was fascinating to me, even as he was Vince McMahon was very evasive the whole time. He didn't want to reveal a lot of things, and I was surprised at how effusive Stone Cold was in praising Vince McMahon.
He went back and forth. I mean, there's times he wanted to dig further, but he did. But it's more than just interviews, too. There's times where he just drives around in his truck and talks into his recorder. I mean, it's an entertaining show. It's beyond wrestling, but I recommend it as well. Josh, do you have a podcast?
Yeah, speaking of feeling like a 12-year-old boy again and things that bring you back to the world that you used to enjoy quite a bit. There's a podcast out there it doesn't need me to pimp it. Let's just put it that way, which is the fantastic thing. It survives on its own. But Star Wars Action News. It sounds like a goofy name. It is. It's a podcast that deals with all things Star Wars. It did deal originally with the collecting side of Star Wars, and thus the term Action News, because they're action figures that they were talking about. But it's really an in-depth show from people that are reasonably local. They're from the Illinois area, Springfield. I've met these individuals. They're very, very pleasant people. On top of that, they do an incredibly professional show. I can't tell you how awesome it seems to have somebody in our age group or whatnot take this to a level that's not simply just a nerd or geek thing. They've reached out to people across the country, and they have hundreds of thousands of people that listen to their show every week. And it's something back in 2008 when I first got an iPod and discovered podcasts. First thing I did, of course, was look for stuff that was in my interest realm, and that was one of the first things that came up, and I'm glad that I found it. There are multiple podcasts, websites dedicated to this particular genre or this subject. They do it better than anybody else, and you couldn't ask for better people to actually root for. They're wonderful people.
I wish I could support you like I did Sean, but I haven't heard that one, so therefore it's harder for me
Sure.
to But no, I mean, it's cool how there's so many podcasts about everything. For me, it's hard to pick one. My favorite podcast is Tell 'em Steve Dave off the Kevin Smith Network, but it's mine, and I don't want to share it with anybody. And then there's obviously IVNV, who's helped us out a ton, and we've met those guys too. But I'm going to go weird here, and I'm going to pick the podcast called I Seem Fun with the Diary of Jen Kirkman. She's a kind of a small comedian. She used to write for Chelsea Handler. And it's literally just her sitting in her room talking into a recorder for an hour. And she goes in and out of different voices, and it's just insanely entertaining. It's smart, it's funny, I don't know, it just is really, it's something you can go to bed listening to because it's such a comforting podcast, and it's really good. And I'd like to see her on more of a Chelsea Handler level or Amy Schumer. I think she deserves to be that big and that popular. But she's, in my opinion, she could be much more popular. I think she's as funny as any comedian out there, male or female. And so really, if you're going to share a podcast, you want to share something with other people to get into, and that's why I would pick that podcast. So those are the podcasts we would share. Thank you again, Team Procreate and Josh and Joel at Pod on Pod. We're big fans of your show, and keep up the good work.
And we're the three best friends that anybody could have. We're the three best friends that anyone could have. We're the three best friends that anyone can have. And we'll never, ever, 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 ever leave each other. We're the best three friends that anybody can have. I mean the three best friends that anybody can have. That's right, the three best friends.
Hi there, Pod on Pod listeners. We are the hosts of the IVNV podcast. My name is Corey.
Hey, I'm Andy. And this is Kurt.
We are a podcast that covers the Chicago Cubs, and the Pod on Pod guys reviewed our podcast on their second episode. So, way back before they had any sort of audience. So that worked out well for us. Could have held us off a little bit longer, guys.
We saw a real spike after that.
Right. And I also want to thank the Pod on Pod guys for their crazy ass way of judging podcasts with earbuds.
Of which there are two.
Right. So we're here to tell you what podcast we will give someone this holiday season. Do you guys want to go first, or you want me to?
Go ahead, and then we'll follow.
Well, I kind of sound like a suck up when I say this, but I would honestly suggest that they listen to Pod on Pod so that they can find other great podcasts. I really like the idea of Pod on Pod. I wanted to do that type of a podcast like 4 or 5 years ago, and technically I started one, but it only lasted 2 or 3 episodes, and I kind of missed something obvious that the Pod on Pod guys figured out early on. So I'm a little bit jealous of this podcast because I like the idea so much, but that wasn't a very good answer. So I have another one. I subscribe to a lot of podcasts. I subscribe to 98 podcasts.
Corey's a podcast hoarder.
Right. So it was really tough for me to narrow this down, but I think that I would give the podcast 99% Invisible, and that is hosted by Roman Mars, and it's part of PRX. So it's kind of in the vein of some of the other NPR type podcasts. Has really high production quality and really polished storytelling. And it's a podcast about design, but that's kind of a loose topic. There's a lot of things that fall under that category, I guess. And so if you were going to start, I would suggest starting with a couple of episodes. Since IVNV, we're a sports podcast, I would suggest listening to episode 127, which is on the sound of sports. So that's really interesting if you're into audio recording and sports. It's really pretty cool. And the other episode that I would suggest starting with is number 111. And that one is on the history of socks and stirrups in baseball. And as far as who I would give this gift to, it would be anyone that has a shorter commute, I guess, for work or school or whatever. Their episodes are about 20 minutes long. And a lot of podcasts are quite a bit longer. And so if you have a short commute, you would kind of have to spread that out over a day or two or something. But this is a really nice, quick, and very interesting podcast.
Yeah, I would second that. In fact, I think I might have thrown that one your way. If I remember
think you
correctly.
may have. I think, somebody suggested
it is really great. But I'm a graphic designer, so I really do love it. But it covers more than that. So
you guys also gave that gift to me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's so good. But since I'm talking, I'll go ahead. And I chose a podcast called Cord Killers. It's done by Brian Brushwood and Tom Merritt. If any of you listen to the sort of twit empire of podcasts, you may have heard them before. But it's about, cutting the cord from cable and satellite. And, it's something I did within the last couple of years, and I've loved it. And it's a little bit heavy on the tech side, but at the same time, it's also they talk a lot about content, and I think it's good for people who are considering dropping cable, and also for people who already have, because if you already have, it gives you a lot of options for content. Talks about the future of what's coming, and if you haven't, it's sort of encouraging to know that you can entertain yourself without a $100 a month plus bill in the mail. So I would go with Cord Killers, and I would give it to like I said, kind of touched on anybody who is considering cutting the cord, or someone who already has, and given some recent developments in the Cubs TV world, which I won't detail here, but if you want to hear it, listen to our podcast. But yeah, like, you know, if you're considering it and you're just kind of frustrated with your cable or satellite provider, listen to this. I think you'll like it.
That's cool, man. I think a lot of guys are kind of grossed out by the idea of cutting the cord. So
yeah,
that's
I've
cool.
just done it for real.
That's
recently.
brave of you.
Well, Kurt, you gifted that to me not that long ago. I just started listening to that podcast maybe about 2 weeks ago.
All right. So for me, I could go with one of my perennial favorites, which is Mike and Tom Eat Snacks, but I'm going to go away from that for this and suggest the Hound Tall discussion series with Moshe Kasher. It is a fairly new podcast on the Nerdist Network, and how it's described on the website is it's an hour-long chat on a topic with an expert and then a panel of comedians. And so it's kind of like the comedians are interviewing the expert and commenting on what the expert says about a particular topic. And so they've only covered 4 topics so far. They've covered harems, polyamory, relationships, being brown in America, and death. And so I would recommend it to anybody who likes dark humor, in particular the death episode. I thought was really funny. I think some people would be put off by it a little bit, but if you like dark humor, if you like comedians like Kumail Nanjiani, Chelsea Peretti, Pete Holmes, Nikki Glazer, Nick Kroll, those comedians have all been guests on this particular podcast, and I think Moshe Kasher is one of the funnier comedians working today. So that's my suggestion, Hound Tall discussion series.
Cool. Okay, so Pod on Pod listeners, from the hosts of IVMV, happy holidays. And if any of you can figure out Josh's rating system for earbuds, we'd love to hear an explanation.
So Josh, our buddies at Pod on Pod have invited us during this holiday time of year to, pretty good idea, to gift a podcast to someone. And we want to thank them for having us on here at Stuff You Should Know.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, and we appreciate it. And you guys do a great job of just getting spreading the good cheer of the podcast round the land.
Oh, yeah, they have their finger on the pulse.
On the pulse.
And their foot on the neck of podcasting.
That's right. So you want to go first with your gift?
Yes, I have 2 gifts, if I may.
I don't think there are any rules against gift giving.
First of all, I would love to give my dear wife Yumi the gift of the City Lights podcast. Specifically the one with Ian Svenonius, who is this kind of DC punk thinker legend guy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. They had him on a City Lights podcast episode, and City Lights is this very famous bookstore and book publisher out of San Francisco.
Okay, that's what it is.
So they have their own podcast. They specifically have one where they interview Ian Svenonius.
That's a good get.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's my gift for Yumi.
Well, what's your other one?
Okay.
Or do we go back and forth?
Let's go back and forth.
Because I got 2 as well.
Oh, good. Yes.
My first gift is to you, my friend.
Oh.
I am going to give you the edition of Bullseye with Jesse Thorne. Specifically the, I believe, November 18th edition, where he interviews the great Paul Rubens.
Oh, nice.
And a.k.a. Pee Wee Herman.
Sure.
And it's just Jesse's one of the best in the business, and it's a great, great interview. And I know how much you love Pee Wee, and I think you will learn a thing or two about the man.
Thank you. I love it.
Unwrap
I
it.
don't even need the gift receipt.
Okay.
Thank you, man.
What else you got?
I've got one. Wow. I've got 3 now.
You do? Oh, no.
So I've got one for my cute little niece, Mila, who is quite the little ham. So I looked up podcasts on acting, and I found that there's a couple, but one that's the kind of the gold standard is called Everything Acting Podcast. It's hosted by Roz and Darby, 2 actresses.
Yeah.
Who basically talk about getting auditions, how to get parts, how to act better. They interview actors, people in the business who are like in the business, like this is their life, this is their career.
That's pretty cool.
And they act. So I figure Mila could enjoy this kind of thing and learn a thing or two. Maybe starting in a few years. She's only 4 right now. But in a few years, I think it'll...
Never too early, my friend.
No.
Well, those are gifts to me as well, because I haven't heard of either one of those podcasts, and they both sound pretty neat.
Thank you. Well, I happen to buy 2 of each.
So my other gift is the Pod on Pod to the world. I think people should go out there, of course, if they're listening to Pod on Pod.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know if, that's exactly going to work because they'd already be listening to it.
Yeah, how are we going to do that?
Well, we can spread the good cheer on our own Facebook page and get the word out.
Well, I have to say something, though. One of the things that I noticed that I found very heartening, which is great because this is the time to be like glad and warm and tidings and all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I just looked up what I was looking for, the kind of thing like decluttering your life or acting or Ian Svenonius or whatever.
Sure.
And podcast. And now we live in this age where it actually brings back stuff for you.
Yeah.
Like good stuff just from a quick search. So podcasting has just become part of the cultural fabric forever.
Yeah.
And ever.
Yeah, and we're proud to be a part of that fabric. And so we want to thank Pod on Pod and say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone out there. And keep on fighting the good fight, guys. And thank you for your help in spreading the word about podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm going to find you a real gift very soon.
Thank you.
Some pretty good stuff there, Josh.
Yeah, I feel like we've definitely Christmas caroled everybody in that, the guests that came on to give their gifts were kind of like ghosts of Christmas past. Like most of them we've already reviewed. What you're listening to right now is the Ghost of Christmas Present. And when you go check out some of those awesome podcasts they suggested, you'll be hitting your Christmas future.
Look at that. It's all wrapped up in a nice little bow for you. Before we say goodbye this week, and we do want to remind you to go check us out in iTunes or on Stitcher. Leave us a review. Leave those other podcasts a review if you check their show out too. That is like the number one gift you can give to a podcaster this Christmas is go tell somebody about them online. Tell them that you enjoyed their show. Give them a little feedback. We always love that. But before we wrap up the show, we want to tell you what podcast we'd like to give away this Christmas.
Sure.
I'm going to start, Josh. I'm going to give the Serial podcast. It's one we reviewed just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm giving it to podcasters everywhere. It's a tremendous gift that keeps on giving for the entire medium of podcasting. You actually sent me a really cool poll. This poll was, I think BuzzFeed put up the poll. It said, are you listening to more podcasts since Serial? 45% said yes, I've discovered a bunch of other cool ones. 41% said not yet, but I'm likely to in the future. And then just 14% said, nah, I think I'll stick to Serial. The fact of the matter is, and we've seen this over and over and over again, all it takes is one show that people really love, and then suddenly they're on fire for podcasting just like you and I are. And so for that, Serial is the gift that keeps on giving.
I think that's a good point to make.
Really broke it out into the mainstream. Exciting times.
When one of us, rising tides raise all ships, man.
Absolutely. That's the best way to put it. That is exactly it. So congratulations to Sarah Koenig and the team of Serial, and congratulations to podcasters everywhere.
So sticking with our whole holiday theme, I'm going to give the spirit of podcasting.
All right, then. You're going to have to explain that one.
So overwhelmingly, the podcasts we have reviewed, whether we've given great reviews on them, whether we've given not so great reviews on them, the support in the podcast community is tremendous.
Very true.
And it's that sense of community, that spirit of podcasting that I'd like people to take to their everyday lives.
That's not a bad gift. I like that. And that's what Christmas is really all about, Charlie Brown. All right. So there you go. That's the holiday episode of Pod on Pod. Visit us at podonpod.com and stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a review for you right in time for New Year's. We're going to be checking out the Adam Carolla show. And then the first show of 2015, it's going to be a three-peat episode. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different history podcasts. That's coming soon in the new year. Until we talk to you again next week,
I'm Josh.
I'm Joel. And keep podding.
Are you wanting something funny? Are you wanting something smart? A show on astral projection or the history of art? Do you want to learn a language or how to play guitar? Just leave it up to Joel and Josh. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Pod on Pod is a proud member of the Procast Network, a Procreate production. Procreate is a community of artists in film, music, the digital arts, and fine arts that helps them connect and collaborate on projects. You can find out more at teamprocreate.com. filmfampersperspective.com. For more great podcasts from the Procast Network, check out Movie Buzzed. Every week, your host, Zach, and some special guests review a new film. It's time for good friends, a great movie, and a good buzz. The Pod on Pod theme song was written and produced by Adam Dale. You can find more information about him on our website, as well as links to his forthcoming album, Cats and Dogs. And our musical guest this week is also Adam Dale.
Puzzle piece, like a lost set of keys, like I'm missing. I cast shadows on every wall, proof that I'm here somehow, but still missing. Yeah. Have you figured out just yet that I'm scared to death of being forgotten? If that's the case, then just let me disappear like a Roman candle, dear, and I'll see you for miles and miles. They'll see us for miles and miles. Maybe I'll have a big parade or a fireworks display by the ocean. Hey, hey. And I'll have my legacy reduced to sparks on an open sea. It beats the light of vanishing. Well, have you figured out just yet that I'm scared to death of being invisible? A basket case, so just let me disappear like a Roman candle, dear, and I'll see you for miles and miles. They'll see us for miles and on the sidewalks, the kings and queens talk about a rocket in a southern accents. Roman Kansas City on a pretty night. I won't be coming back, but it's alright. Sometimes on a night like this, I like to sit and reminisce about you. Though there's still distance in between, evidence that you can still be seen. They'll see us for miles and miles. They'll see us for miles and